Hi, everyone. Peldi here, substitute hosting for Steve again. And today I'm joined by Asia Orangio, founder of DemandMaven. Welcome, Asia.
Yes, welcome. Yes, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
I am excited that you're here with us. So let's start with an easy one. Tell us briefly a little bit about yourself and what DemandMaven is and why you decided to start it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so hi, I'm Asia. I am the CEO and founder of DemandMaven. We work with SaaS companies, both early stage and later stage, on identifying their absolute best growth opportunities and helping them ultimately overcome their challenges when it comes to growth. And my background is I come from a marketing and demand gen background. And over the years, I have been going more and more into growth and go to market. I also sit on the board of Moz. Fun fact about me. And yeah, that's kind of just like the really the quick and dirty about Demand Maven and myself. I started Demand Maven because I identified an opportunity to help founders not only learn about how marketing works, but also actually define a go-to-market strategy that helps them best accomplish their goals, both personally and business-wise. And there's a lot of different ways that we go through that process, some of which we're actually going to talk about today, which I'm really pumped and excited about. And the other reason why I started Demand Maven was because I wanted to have the founder experience of running my own company and also investing in my CEO skills personally.
Right.
So that's a lot of the reason why I also
That's
built Demand Maven.
that's excellent. When did you start DemandMaven?
Oh man, okay. 2018, I want to say.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
2018. It was spring 2018. We are about 3 years into Demand Maven. Yeah, that would make sense.
Nice. Awesome, awesome. Congratulations. Well, I asked you here today because as a technical founder myself, marketing has a bad rep, right? People think of marketing and they still think of repetitive advertising or spamming or, trying to shove a message down people's throat through repetition, it kind of has a bad reputation. But the problem is that you need marketing. You need to do some marketing, or your product won't find the right audience, right? Um, Now, a lot of people talk about as a first step to do marketing, they talk about talking to customers, right? But a lot of coders, myself included at the beginning, were completely not comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I bother a customer with my questions? What's in it for them? I don't want to take advantage. Maybe I'll just code another feature instead. you know.
Yeah.
So first of all, is it really that important to talk to customers?
Yes. Yes. Excellent question. Well, first, I want to just give some grace to the people who are very intimidated by the process of speaking to customers. It can feel extremely uncomfortable at the very beginning. However, in the really early days of building a product and going to market with a product, usually the customer research that happens or the customer interviews that happens, it has more to do with features and understanding what are the pains or problems that need to be solved, and then do these features actually help. And usually that process, it's a lot of collecting user stories and very product focused. However, over time, what we find as organizations get more information about what kinds of customers or segments of the market they ultimately want to serve, and as they start identifying what product maturity looks like, customer research actually plays a very different role in the long term. And it becomes all about how the product is currently serving value, why customers ultimately choose your product over the alternatives, which, even if you don't have direct competitors, you're still probably competing with something. It could be doing nothing. It could be spreadsheets. It definitely has a range just depending on the product and the market that you're in. But what customer research does is it helps us identify why customers choose us over maybe the others, and that tells us how we can best position our product, how we communicate that value to customers, and specific customers, not just anyone, but people who are going to be best served by what we have today, And then, of course, later down the road, when you really start executing on acquisition, you can also start to identify what are the right channels, what are the discovery habits of our customers, how do they find solutions and choose them, what objections or fears do they have as they go through the process of finding solutions. There's so much psychologically that goes into the process of finding, selecting, and investing in software. And if you're not software, it could be anything, it could be any product or service. But to understand what that actual journey looks like is so crucial, because if you don't know what the journey looks like, then you don't know what gaps you ultimately need to fill. So that's why I recommend not just doing customer research in the very early days of like building your MVP or validating product features, but to also use it from a growth and go-to-market perspective as well.
Right. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how can this be automated? How can this be done
How
without
can I
talking
not do it?
without talking to people, right? Are there things that people can do to, you said, how do they find you? Well, maybe I could set up a funnel with a referral, uh, like, are there ways to do it, or should we really talk to people?
I think that there is room and space for both to happen. I do think that the priority should actually be talking to people. And purely the reason why is because there's so much nuance that happens when a person is actually talking to you. It's really easy to listen to what someone is saying and then paraphrase it and condense it into what makes sense to you. But actual true voice of customer, there's usually tons of information and tons of nuance that actually happens when someone is voicing and speaking to you. And usually what I recommend is getting a transcript, of course, but I'm sure, we'll get into that in a second. But I do think that there's room, however, for the other side of it as well. So there's plenty of opportunity to automate sending out a survey or a quick questionnaire, especially after someone has achieved a really specific product milestone, if they've just signed up or if they've just converted or if they've churned. There's all kinds of opportunity to automate the process of collecting maybe more passive feedback. However, what I find is it's one thing to know, like, yep, like this was the number one reason why I canceled, but it's another to get the full story about what led up to that cancellation or what led up to that activation or whatever that one critical moment was. So I do think that you ultimately do need both. However, there is still room to automate. And if it's not necessarily you, the founder, it could also be someone else. So you could
Right.
bring
That
in
was going to be
someone
my
to
next
help.
question. If I really can't do that, what should I do? Can I hire that away, or should I get a co-founder who's able to do that or enjoys doing that?
I think if someone in internal has the skill set, I would leverage that skill set if possible. So
So it could
if
be
you
someone in support, for instance.
yeah, like if someone in customer success or support or I don't know if you would necessarily want an engineer to not be coding, but if you have a developer, an engineer who's really good at this kind of soft skills, so to speak, and it could be outsourced. So in DemandMaven's case, for example, we are often the very first team to ever do customer research for our clients in some cases. And sometimes they've done customer research before, but it's 3 years old or
Right.
something to that effect. So yes, you can absolutely delegate this. I think as long as you, strategically speaking, have a good focus of the research,
Mm.
then you should be good, especially if someone else can actually do the
Right.
work.
I guess the problem if you delegate it to someone else is that you don't really feel that gut pain when you get an answer directly from a customer. It's always there's the risk that the person you delegated to doesn't want to hurt your feelings, and so they don't give it to you straight.
Yes, it's definitely there's definitely a translation gap that happens between the person who's running the interview and then the notes that they take or how they parse that research and then of course giving it back to the team. Although I will say, in my experience doing customer research, I find that customers themselves are much more likely to be open and honest when it's not you, the founder, that's talking to
Huh.
them. So there is actually a plus, a pro to having someone else do it, especially if you're not necessarily the ones who actually built the product. I find that, yes, like the founder should absolutely be involved in some way. They should listen to the recording, for example, of the call, or they should follow up if the person who was interviewed seems like a churn risk. But I do think that there's also a good side, of course, to delegating it to someone else, because especially if the customer doesn't, if they're like, oh, you guys, well, you didn't build the product, so I can be honest with you.
Interesting, interesting. That's nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's a lot of the listeners to this podcast are one or two people shops. A lot of single founders who are just maybe their first bootstrap startup, so they don't really have the money to hire someone to do this, or anyone else to delegate to. So I'd like your help in demystifying what a customer call looks like. Is there sort of
Mhm.
an algorithm that people can follow to sort of make it easier on themselves to have a successful call?
Absolutely.
Okay,
So,
let me start from. I'll ask you a few questions. Like, how do
okay.
you even start? How do you recruit, and who do you recruit to? What kind of customers or non-customers? Who should I talk to first?
Yeah. Okay, so before we decide who we talk to, the first step is going to be deciding what is this research going to help us solve or overcome.
Okay.
I'm assuming if we're doing customer research, we're doing it because there's some knowledge gaps that we have. Maybe like there's something that we don't understand. It could also be that we're experiencing growth challenges. It could be that we have no idea where to start with marketing, or it could also be that we're trying to identify the next product sprint. I mean, there's so
Right.
many
Well,
different use cases
let's
for it.
assume that
Yeah.
the project's pretty good. It has some a few customers, but not enough.
Mhm.
I'd like to
Okay.
find more customers. I suspect it's my website that's not attracting the right people. You know, I feel like a lot of people might have this particular issue. So
Okay.
in
Perfect.
this case, who do I talk to? Do I talk to the few customers that I have, or do I hire random people on the street? Who should I
Yeah.
who should I try to talk to first?
Okay, so the challenge is an acquisition. We
Yeah.
need more customers, and we need to identify what needs to happen from an acquisition perspective. And if we
Hmm.
suspect that the website is a challenge, then that's something that we need to validate that assumption or
Hmm.
hypothesis. Okay, so how we would structure research. So the first thing that we would do is we're going to identify the customer segments that we think is most likely going to give us the feedback that we need to make the best decision. So what I typically recommend is I would talk to two cohorts of existing customers. The first cohort, that's going to be people that you've recently acquired, people who have joined and converted in the last 1 to 3 months, we'll say. It needs to be recent enough that they remember the process. So ideally, these are people who they've recently converted, and they seem to be active, relatively speaking, and also therefore probably getting some value. The second cohort, those are going to be your absolute raving fans, your best paying customers, the people that you love working with and also love you and your product and what you're doing. And these might actually be some of your most critical constituents across the board. But at the same exact time, they are very invested in what it is that you're doing. They're getting a ton of value. They might have some qualms or quirks about it. They might have some criticism, so to speak. But generally speaking, they're pretty freaking happy, and they're most likely not going anywhere. Those are your
That's
two
nice
cohorts.
because the second group is probably happy to talk to us
Hmm.
because they're happy with the product. They're invested in it. They Even if it's a young product, they sort of got on the train and they want us to be successful, right? They're
Yes.
okay. So those should be easy to recruit. The other ones probably also fairly easy because they just converted, so you know that they're getting invested. They're getting value out of it, and so
Hmm.
all right. So how many people do you suggest we talk to for a specific study?
Yeah.
Is there a minimum number?
Yeah, this is going to shock a lot of people, but it's absolutely true in this case. You really just need 7 interviews.
Oh, wow. That's not
Now,
a lot.
it is not a lot. And anytime I say that number, everyone's always like, wow, that seems really low. And there's actually a ton of studies when it comes to jobs to be done research. So a lot of the framework that we use for our customer research is jobs to be done. It is an incredible framework. But anyway, I digress. So
Google it.
they actually recommend 10,
Okay.
and you just need 10 interviews. Now, there are some sticklers who would say you need 10 or 7 to 10 per cohort. I actually think that
Okay.
that's a pretty healthy number. So if we've got maybe 7 of our absolute best paying customers and maybe 7 of our more recent converts, so to speak, then that could actually be a pretty good foundation to begin the research process.
Right. So
It's
that's
not a big
enough
number.
to get enough information to come out with a clear to-do list at the end.
It's just enough interviews to identify your patterns and to
Hmm.
isolate the outliers, because you're absolutely going to have outliers in certain cases where like really edge use cases or
Hmm.
but you're also going to hear the patterns, and
Hmm.
the patterns of the really happy people.
Right.
And based off of the actual research that you're doing, that's just enough to extrapolate that into the rest of the market. Of
Nice.
course, you'll have to continue doing customer research over the long term because the market will change. You'll acquire
Right.
new
Right.
segments. There's all kinds of reasons why, but yes, that's all you really
Okay.
need.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So it seems like it's not so scary. I don't have to recruit too many people, and the cohorts that you suggested should be people that should be fairly easy to recruit.
Mm-hmm.
That they're happy to talk to us. All right, so let's say we're in an interview. We scheduled it. We agreed. We're on Zoom or whatever. What do we say first?
The first thing is, of course, to, well, thank them, of course, for getting on the call, which in terms of the details of actually getting the customer on the call, I recommend not incentivizing it. Like, I don't recommend offering a gift card or anything like that. These should be people who are willing to just participate in general. This is how you know, too, that they're not just after the gift card and then kind of, money is like the research itself, but you're definitely thanking them. However, you can surprise them after the call with a reward or a gift of some kind.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And then after that, I usually recommend giving them an overview of how the call will go. There's actually a few things that I say. I've run hundreds of customer interviews by this point, and there's a few things that I say that just kind of takes the edge off of whatever it is that you're about to talk about. I like to give them an overview. So first, we're going to start by talking about you and talking about your role, or whatever the context is of your product, and then we're going to move more over into how you're currently using our product. And then we'll, of course, ask questions related to what you'd like to improve. And then finally, we'll round it out with whatever we decide to round out the call with. It could be sometimes I ask questions related to the overall market, how the customer views the market. It could be related to their process. Because this is in the context of acquisition, I'd probably be asking questions like, where do you hang out? If you're this kind of role or persona, where do you go to find more information about your industry, or where do you spend time online, offline, etc.
Nice. So
And
the
that
last
helps.
question
Yeah.
is about, since we're on the call already, let me take advantage of more generic, broader questions. I see.
Yes, and again, based off of the kind of research that you're doing, your questions are should match that goal. So, if our project objective, for example, is to figure out what can we be doing from an acquisition perspective, I'll be asking questions about channels and discovery
Right,
habits. How would you find a solution?
right, right.
And that kind of gives us
Yeah, that's
answers to that.
perfect. Because if they say, well, I always go to this website to find new software, then you know that you need to advertise on that website, right? Or if
Exactly.
they say, I go to this conference and I look at the booths and et cetera, so then you know you need to go get a booth there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very clever. All right, so I like that. You thank them, you give them an overview so that they know what to expect. What happens next?
I'll also give a few just disclaimers. Like I'll say things like, there are no wrong answers. Like every customer interview, they're always, sometimes they get hung up on like, I don't know if this is what you want. And the answer is always like, yes, this is exactly what I want. And then also I just ask them for their honest feedback. I just ask that you are open and honest throughout this call today. And usually everyone's like, okay. And it's like their mission to be
Oh,
honest. And that's
nice.
awesome. And then finally, I will, before we actually get into questions, I always ask permission to record. If you do a call on Zoom, this is pretty easy. If you run a call through Google, I think it's Google Meet, much harder. I actually don't even know how I would record on a tool like Google Meet. So as long as you're able to record the call, that is the most crucial part. And the reason why we do that is because with a recording, you can get a transcript. And with transcripts, you can get real, true voice of customer. These aren't boiled down notes or parsed down notes from someone else of you hearing something, translating it, and then sending that off to somewhere else. It is just the actual words that the customer said, which usually is worth its weight in gold over notes. Like to me, voice of customer from a real customer is gold, and like our notes are silver in my opinion.
Nice.
So we always try to get actual real voice of customer.
Nice. Okay. So, and also if you record, then you can pay attention to them instead of trying to take notes. You can pay
Yes.
full attention, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I'm a freakazoid whenever it comes to running interviews. I actually partially transcribe what they're saying as they're saying it.
Oh,
I
wow.
Yeah, it's not a perfect transcript by any stretch, but it actually helps me retain the information.
I see.
But some people are not like that, and they just need to focus on the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I'm more like that. Yeah.
Yes. Uh,
Okay.
yes.
All right. All right. So we're all set. We're recording. Uh, you have my full attention now. How do I remember what to ask? Do I always ask the same questions? Do I let the conversation flow? Uh, how do I do the meat of the interview?
Usually, before any kind of research project, we've already decided what questions we're going to ask, and we've also decided what order we're going to ask them. Usually, we are asking questions that help us craft a story and craft a narrative. And when you're deciding what questions to ask, you can use your best judgment and intuition on how those questions and in what order should they be asked, because it's pretty obvious, at least when it comes to kind of crafting that narrative. But we already have an interview template, ideally with our questions already there. It's as simple as clicking two buttons, making a copy of that, and then asking the questions from top to bottom. Now, in the very first few interviews that you do, it is very possible that as you ask your questions, some questions, depending on the kind of customer that you're targeting, sometimes they trip people up, or it's not clear, or like the question needs to be rephrased or reworded so the customer understands them. So a great example of this is if you decided to interview restaurant owners, for example, you might be asking them questions related to like technology or software or what have you that they might have zero context for. So it's just important just to take note in your first like 1 to 3 interviews, which questions did they really seem to understand and which ones need to be rephrased or reorganized.
Right.
You might also decide you actually need to ask different questions. That's very possible. So in the first few interviews, keep it open to adjusting your strategy interviewing wise over time. But ideally, you've already got the template. You've already got somewhere where those questions are. You make a copy, you take your notes. Yes, you still hit record, of course. But that's really how we would approach that. And also keeping in mind that yes, you've got this initial structure, but that structure could change based off of how customers react to your questions. We've
Right.
definitely done that too.
Right, because I feel like if it's too structured, I might miss out. I might sometimes it'd be good to probe when they say something. It
Mm-hmm.
might be like some sort of trigger word where I'm like, actually, wait, what do you mean? Let's go down that path, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So is that allowed, or should I stick to the questions that I wrote down?
Yes, you're actually going to do both. Especially if you schedule like a 30 or 45-minute call. There's actually a lot of ground you can cover in that amount of time. We do both. We manage to get all of our questions in according to our strategy and our template when it comes to the research. But you're exactly right. There are certain trigger words that happen that tell us that we need to dig deeper. So common ones, for example, are um, uh, this particular product makes it so easy.
Hmm.
Easy is a trigger word for us. It usually it's kind of I hate to say it sounds so mean, but it's kind of a lazy word. It's the word that we use when we don't want to think too hard about what easy means. So whenever we hear that in an interview, we're like, oh, tell me more about that. How does balsamic make it easier for you? In what way? Tell me more about that. And usually the customer is like, okay, well, yeah, like let me really dig deep into this and get deeper into what that means. And you might actually find that easy could have meant a million different things. uh, Easy is one of those. Simple, fast. Fast is one of those deceptive words where fast how? Like fast in that it shortened the amount of time, it was fewer clicks. Like in what way was it fast? There's a few words that are like that we know our ears perk whenever we hear that. We know to dig deeper. And for your particular business, it could look very different.
Got it. Got it. Nice. All right. So you mentioned a few ways to phrase these questions, but are there some big mistakes that one should avoid when crafting these questions?
Probably the most obvious one is just copying someone else's customer research questions and just asking them without
Right.
any real structure or a goal in mind. But I think that the other the other big, I think, uh, mistake or pitfall is not actually getting the full story. Any particular interview, there is some narrative that ideally you're crafting in some kind of way. Yes, like you could just ask a bunch of totally uncorrelated or related questions to someone, but you really want to get the past, the present, and the future, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Even if it was a feature, for example, that you were trying to get feedback on, there's still a before, a during, and an after that happens. So making sure that you actually get like the full context of what that person is experiencing, a huge thing to make sure that you don't miss. It's really easy to just kind of like ask questions and then just, oh, okay, like that was the answer.
Right.
But ideally we're digging a little bit deeper, and we're also kind of getting like the full the before,
Right.
during, and after of it.
So should the questions be kind of a little more open-ended?
Yeah.
You don't want a very short answer. You don't get a lot of value out of a tiny answer, right?
It's a really common interviewing mistake, but sometimes we'll ask questions that already present the solution in them,
Right.
or they're just basically like yes or no questions. We try to ask questions that uh, uh, we're not answering it for the customer,
Oh,
and
I do
it's
that all the time.
yes. So like, yeah, tell me more about, what places you hang out, such as LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah.
And it's like, human brains are incredibly complex, but also very lazy. And people will latch on to the last thing that you say. So we try not to ask,
Right.
questions that have solutions in them.
Or the other thing that happens is you ask a question about the product and they show that they're confused, and you immediately jump in saying, "Oh, let me tell you how it actually works," right?
It
Uh,
is,
this is
it is
not the time
a,
to do that, right?
yes, it is a superpower to restrain yourself.
I guess you could do that at the end of the call. Oh, by the way, let me send you the documentation about how.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Being able to take notes too on what you will follow up with, and what is still worth taking back to the product team, because research that you do, it's going to have impact for really everyone.
Mhm.
But being able to also take note on, okay, so this person mentioned this, like we probably need to follow up later and go over that with them to make sure they understand something. There's all kinds of ways that you can handle that though.
All right, so I guess the call is going well. I Is there a duration that is recommended? What
Yeah.
is it, like half an hour of the main questions or more?
You can uh, I would say anywhere from like 20 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
I do think it really depends on how many questions that you have. We're able to get in like 10 to 12, sometimes even 15 questions in 45 minutes.
Oh, that's a
I
lot.
have run I have run interviews as short as 15 and still gotten a lot of insight and information.
Okay.
But I think as
Okay.
long as you are hitting the main points of your goals and your objectives for the interview, you should be good with 20 to 45.
That's great. All right. So, how do you wrap it up? Do you have a formula for that too?
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple of ways that you can wrap up the call based off of the context. Now, in this particular case, it's based off of acquisition. So uh, our ultimate goal was to probably get ideas for acquisition, maybe identify some gaps that we had when it came to acquiring customers, maybe identify some objections or fears or anything like that. But based off of the nature of the call, if you found that you had someone who was just a diehard raving fan, absolutely loved the product, saw a ton of great results, that's actually a perfect opportunity to ask them if they'd be open to taking this call that you just did and turning that into a case study or
Oh,
turning that
nice.
into like a client or customer feature. It's a really easy strategy to just really quickly get case study material, and you can take that transcript of that interview and turn it into a case study. You can hire a case study buddy, and they can kind of help you with that. And there's tons of ways to take that content and turn it into something else. And if you find that they were not necessarily the happiest customer ever, then maybe offering the case study is not the best idea. But what you could also do is, if you think that they're a churn risk, then that's a great opportunity to schedule follow-ups on, okay, let's make sure that they're actually achieving success from this. Or it could also be, of course, that it's a scenario where it is a do nothing scenario, except for just take the feedback and implement it elsewhere.
Okay.
But in the actual call, usually what I'll say is I'll just say, thank you so much, for their time, the typical things. If they're a great case study opportunity, I'll ask them if they'd be open to taking that call and translating it to a case study with, of course, their permission on the final deliverable.
Mhm.
And then also, it's always a good idea to surprise them with something. It could be an actual reward of like a $50 gift card or something like that. It could also be an extra month of the product or
Right.
whatever you feel comfortable with. You don't have to surprise the customer, although I find it's just, I don't know, it's a nice touch whenever you do, because it
Yeah.
wasn't something that you led with, but you're surprising them with it later.
Now, do you do it in the call or do you do it in an email after the call?
It could be either. I've done the email after. I find actually doing it in the call is much easier. I just ask them like, "Hey, would it be okay if I just sent you like a gift
Oh,
card?" And they're
nice.
usually like, "That
Sure.
sounds amazing." And then you get to
Awesome.
get to hear it from them.
Awesome. Awesome.
Um,
Okay.
Sending the email after feels like extra work, so I usually don't do it.
Okay. Okay. No, that makes sense. You're already on the call. All right. That's perfect. Now, what do we do after the call?
Okay, this is honestly the secret sauce. Like, this is like, yes, talking to the customer, that's definitely, I don't know, 60 or so percent of the work, but the rest is like the 40% of the work. So
Okay.
after the call, you're going to do a couple of things. You're going to order the transcript of the recording. I use rev.com. However, there are all kinds of AI and little robots that will sit with you on your Zoom call and auto record or auto translate and transcribe for you. Whatever is your favorite. What you're going to do after that, though, is you are going to identify the themes and overall, um, we call them tags. Like, we actually use Airtable to parse our research, but based off of what you're trying to accomplish from a research perspective, you're actually going to go through those answers from the customers and tag them or document them in some kind of way that makes it like really easily searchable. So what this actually looks like inside of Airtable is we take that transcript, we populate them into a few different tables based off of the questions that we're asking, and then we create tags that are correlated to what those answers were. So we used acquisition as our main example. If one of the questions that I've asked was, if you had never heard of balsamic before, how would you go through the process of finding it, knowing what you know today? They'd probably say things like, I'd probably ask a friend, probably hit up Google, and I'd probably go looking through one of the communities I'm a part of. So we would actually create tags for each of those. There's now a tag for Google search. There's a tag now for whatever that community was. And there's probably going to be a tag for word of mouth or asking a colleague. Multiply that 20 different times over with the interviews that you've got. You're going to get different answers from different people, but you're also going to notice what the trends are.
Right.
And if you're using like a spreadsheet or an Airtable or something to help you parse that research, you'll actually be able to literally build a graph of
Nice.
what people said.
Right.
That's just for one question. You can do that for all of your questions
Mhm.
and identify the themes across all of them.
Nice, nice. And then earlier you mentioned voice of the customer. I guess some of what they said could be potentially a quote for the website, a testimonial, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So this is a great opportunity to also identify customer testimonials. This is also a really great opportunity to use this content in like, yes, like you could certainly turn into a case study. You could also do like a customer highlight where maybe it's not a full blown case study, but it's something a little bit more minimal. There's all kinds of things that you can do with this content using moving forward. You can use it also to influence your website copy. So many copywriters love voice of customer because they're able to take actual real quotes from what customers said and then use that in their actual like landing pages for website. It's incredibly powerful tool.
That makes a lot of sense. And also, it makes sense when paired with what we were talking about probing when they say fast and easy, because if you don't probe, all you can put on your website is we're fast and easy, but that's what everybody else says as well. So it means nothing.
Exactly.
So if you
Being able,
probed, now you can say better, you can write your value proposition with better, more specifically.
yes, exactly. It dramatically improves your messaging if you take that and apply it. And I think and this is a step that I really don't talk about enough, but I think the ultimate last step is after you go through that process, making sure it gets distributed to the rest of the team. So product managers can use this, marketers can absolutely use this, but it also influences even strategically, like from a business perspective, if you've identified that there's actually a really huge customer gap that is happening with the product in the market, then from a strategic perspective, you can focus efforts there as well.
Right.
Getting it
How
back
do you
to, yeah.
share it to the rest of the team? Because they can't all jump into Airtable, understand your complex system of tagging and reporting.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways that we do this. So, whenever we work with clients, usually what we recommend is that they either read the transcripts or listen, whichever is their personal preference for how they like to just retain information. And then the second thing that we do is we actually will provide reports. We'll produce just they're basically like slide decks essentially of here are the key insights, here are the actual quotes that we heard from customers, and here's who should be paying attention to this essentially. And then of course they always get access to everything that we've done from an Airtable perspective,
Right.
but that would be a way that we would do that. And there's platforms that handle this. I think for a really small team, I'd probably just look at taking out, the insights and sending that off to someone, including links to the transcripts. And
Nice.
that should hopefully be enough to pique that person's curiosity or interest to dig deeper.
Nice. Well, listen, Asia, the way you broke it down, it's not so scary anymore. I feel like it really is a checklist, and you know what to say, when to say it, and how to focus the question. So, thank you very, very much. This is all that we have time for today. But if someone wants to go deeper and wants to talk to you, maybe hire Demand Maven to help them with their company, where can they find you?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so the first place I would recommend is going to demandmaven.io. There's all kinds of content there. There's a YouTube channel, there's a podcast there, there's also the occasional blog. And then also hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Asia Orangio. I am an open book, happy to answer any questions you guys have about some of the more tactical details of how things actually get executed in this process. And also, if you have questions about how to structure your research, that's something I can also support on as well. But yes, please come to me with questions that you have. I would love to get them answered.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Asia, for being on the show.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
Bye.
Bye.